All right, welcome to Modernizing Hybrid IT for Cost and Efficiency. My name is John Wilke. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager with Okta, also joined by my colleague Snegha. And today we'll be talking through rethinking AD, talking a little bit about the business value and business impact of modernizing hybrid IT. We've got a couple of customer success stories where Okta has been able to provide some incredible value. And then we'll also talk through a little bit of the more technical side of things. So how does this apply to you, apply to your organization, things like that. So super excited for the session today. Let's go ahead and dive in. So before we get started, of course, we have a safe harbor statement. Okta is a publicly traded company. Please don't take any information from today's presentation and make any investing or business decisions. I think most folks have seen this statement before, but of course, we do want to go ahead and acknowledge it. So before we dive in, this is our kind of high-level agenda for today's session. I think I touched on a couple of these right at the top of the deck. But we're really focused on three areas, right? So the first is just the overall business value of rethinking hybrid IT. So how do we, demonstrate the impact on your organization? How do we measure that for folks who maybe aren't quite as technical? How does it apply to you? So this is something that I'm really excited about in the session. We are focused on access control, rethinking AD. We've got some recommended materials, other sessions that you can join as well. Just to kind of talk through on the technical side of things, how have other organizations been successful? How have they been able to use Okta to increase that efficiency and decrease costs? And then finally, we'll wrap up with kind of a call to action and next steps. And then we'll have some Q&A as well. So one thing that we do want to call out just in terms of formatting, this is a pre-recorded session. So all of the presenters, Snegha and myself, we will be available for Q&A via chat at the end of the session. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, even though it's pre-recorded, we are on the session as it's playing. So if you have questions, feel free to enter those in the chat. We're more than happy to answer those either during the presentation or at the end. All right, so business value. Business value at Okta is basically a concept that we started about 4 or 5 years ago, have since built out a pretty robust team around it to basically help our customers understand beyond the technical features and functions, how is Okta able to impact their business? Things like IT cost savings, increasing productivity for users, decreasing that security attack surface. So we wanted to talk through the business value example with Norwegian Refugee Council. So if you're not familiar, NRC is a independent humanitarian organization. They operate all over the world, everywhere from Cambodia or Myanmar to Colombia. They're a small but mighty workforce, and they usually work in pretty remote areas. So being a nonprofit or NGO organization, cost is, of course, very important to them. Budget is budget, and so they need to be able to maximize the efficiency and productivity of all of their users. So they've been an Okta customer for several years now, and over time have kind of gone through several phased approaches. So this is kind of like an overall kind of high-level slide here, just summarizing. We'll actually dig into the actual process and talk through how we came up with these results and were able to measure the impact that Okta's had with NRC. But really their goal when they came and first started conversations with Okta was to be able to efficiently scale their infrastructure, their IT stack, while maintaining that zero trust profile. So their work involves working with folks who are refugees, as the name implies, either fleeing a war or a regime. And so they need to be able to track identity for those folks. So, that's not only core to their mission and their organization, but also just a big part of, their kind of day to day and the core of their technology stack. So, on this slide, we've got a great quote from Mads, who is their global IT one of their global IT leaders. And he's basically talking about, how are we going to transition to the cloud? How are we going to take our legacy stack and be able to, without cutting the cord overnight, I think is what he says in the quote here, but over time be able to make that transition from a business perspective so that we can really get the best bang for our buck on all of our software and technology investment. So the results here, before we dive in, I'll talk about how we came to some of these numbers, but just from IT cost savings with SSO, they see about 120,000 per year in savings. They were able to sunset their previous VPN solution, so about 300,000 per year in savings, and then they're getting about 6,000 hours in terms of, or basically recouped hours with automated provisioning with Okta's lifecycle management solution. So these are some really impressive, really insightful numbers. And if you look at 6,000 hours per year, that's basically the equivalent of 3 full-time employees that were spending time on automated provisioning and deprovisioning. They're now able to go and focus on something else. So, this is a really exciting story, and we'd like to go ahead and just talk through a little bit more, actually, the process of how we were able to arrive at these numbers and how NRC was able to really maximize that transition with hybrid IT. So before we actually dive into the numbers, I want to give just a little bit of background on this example with NRC. Basically, as I mentioned, Okta's business value team typically comes in on the pre-sale side to help just discover, okay, what's the potential value? Does this investment make sense? Is Okta's solution aligned with the roadmap for a customer or for an organization? But throughout training, deployment, adoption, eventually renewal, the team will actually come back, and as business objectives change or the technology stack changes, we'll come back and be able to set a new benchmark, measure that value again. And that's exactly what we've done with Norwegian Refugee Council. The team, both on the pre-sale side, but also throughout several phases of NRC's journey, has been able to come back in and actually measure and say, okay, for this phase, this is what we're seeing in value. But let's talk about, if we were to, for example, completely move off of Active Directory and store all identities in Okta's universal directory, what would that look like? So the process here is basically what we think of as the value realization exercise. We come in, we measure historical value, we measure potential future value or unrealized value. And then throughout that process, we're also just making sure that we're aligned with the customer. What are your program initiatives? What are your priorities? And the way that we measure value from Okta's perspective is really across 3 big areas. So one is decreasing those IT costs, increasing efficiency that I spoke to earlier, acceleration of organization growth. So the fact that over time, NRC has been able to add employees, they're continually growing, they're able to expand into new geographies and do that in an efficient way without having to go out and deploy servers or hire a bunch of new full-time employees, things like that. And then finally, again, we've got mission alignment here for NRC since they are an NGO, but this is also true for for-profit businesses as well, making sure that we understand their roadmap, understand what is on the CFO's mind or the executive board's mind, things like that. So let's actually look at beyond just that summary slide. When we went through the process with Norwegian Refugee Council, looking at IT cost savings, looking at productivity, we don't actually measure security benefits on a dollar for dollar basis, but we can still talk through things like that reduced attack surface, avoided cost of a security breach, things like threat insight. So if you have Norwegian Refugee Council that is operating in geographies that most businesses may not typically operate in, they want to be able to see who's logging in from where. And so if they suddenly get a suspicious login or someone logs in from the Middle East and then a couple hours later is logging in from Southeast Asia, they know that that's probably not one that they, or an authentication that they should approve. And so they're going to be able to quickly see that, block it, respond to it, really just getting those security benefits. So this is a really great story overall. If you want to read a little bit more about the great work that the NRC is doing, highly encourage you just Google Okta and Norwegian Refugee Council. We've got a great video, even more stats than we've included in the presentation today, just telling that overall story. But what I'm really focused on for the purposes of this presentation is that retired legacy IT and the savings that NRC was able to see with that. So, back in late 2019, we basically came in, talked to NRC, talked about like the, deprecating the legacy VPN, kind of that phase one that they were able to make progress with Okta. And then we started talking a little bit more about phase two, right? And what was the value they'd achieved. So NRC is unique in that they did what a lot of Okta customers do, which is where they were able to sunset ADFS by implementing Okta. That's fairly common, getting rid of those servers, getting rid of maintenance, things like that. But NRC actually took it a step forward. So they were actually able to move all identities from Active Directory into Universal Directory. So they're still, they still have some legacy IT. They still have a lot of cloud IT, which is their focus and will continue to be their focus. But they're basically running everything off of Universal Directory. So by being able to sunset all of these different services, Active Directory, ADFS, SP gateways, everything that they were able to knock out in 2019, on top of the savings that they already had, they were able to get an incremental 171,000 per year in additional annual savings. So, this is a pretty special story that, sometimes we see with smaller growing organizations. They'll say, we want to keep all identities in Universal Directory. It's fairly unusual for an organization with thousands of employees, or at least so far has been somewhat unusual for an organization with thousands of employees to be able to move from Active Directory to Universal Directory. So these are some impressive numbers. It's a great story, but the next question that I think is in everyone's mind is, okay, NRC was able to do this, but how? What is the actual technical background and steps that they took to be able to achieve these savings? So with that in mind, I'd like to hand it off to my colleague Snegha to talk a little bit more about how this applies to organizations and how potentially your organization could achieve these same value metrics that NRC did.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks for walking us through all the things that NRC did. Hi, everyone. My name is Snegha, and I'm a senior security specialist on the pre-sales team. I work with John and our customers to really see what solutions help them take the next step with their problem statements. I know we've been talking a lot about Rethink AD and all the different things that NRC did, and what I hope to give you now is a pattern to think about these things. What are the steps that you can individually take to truly make a difference in your environment, or to start to create a plan for a lot of these changes or needs in your environment to realize some of the changes that NRC did as well. So if we kind of jump in here, hopefully a lot of you have been our customers for a while now, but we've had new products, new features, new guidance on all things hybrid IT, how to make the most of your environment, how to make sure that you're reducing the load on both end users and admins, and how to make that difference that's truly going to make a change. You've hopefully heard some announcements, as well as in the past few years, seen our investments in things like our Okta integration network, threat insight, VPN, and on-prem versus cloud, all the different types of tools and features that will help you take that next step. What I hope to do in the next 10 minutes is to walk you through what are those steps that could possibly help you possibly see some of the benefits that Norwegian Refugee Council saw as well. So let's get started. First, if you see this slide, you are able to see that there's different levels of where you can be. Now, these different levels aren't always a way to say that you have gotten further or behind or something like that, but it's more to start to see how are we balancing security and productivity, and what are the different layers that we can start to work on to peel apart that next step? Is it a feature set? Is it starting to take account of the different environments? Is it starting to think about what products are sticky but not being used? It's starting to really look at your environment in a different way. We'll walk through this in a few different steps. So taking stock, quick win, big win, going broad, and then getting disruptive. I know they sound small and simple, and we hope to really make sure that you can see how this applies to you. So the first step we talk about is take stock. This is just as it sounds. Whenever I work with customers, be it on this project or anything else, one of the key things that we spend a lot of time on is, what does your environment look like? Not just from the perspective of the team that I'm working with, but in general with the whole environment. And that a lot of the times means talking to teams that may be in other parts of the company, that may be working with components that aren't actively used by everybody, but really starting to understand, what is my technology stack? How are we interfacing on a day-to-day basis to the different things in my environment? This really helps, and in conversations with Mads, who did a lot of this for Norwegian Refugee Council, he really talked about how he had to start working with team leaders, his counterparts in different parts of the organization who may have been using certain tools that not everyone was aware of, and really putting those together as to how they all link together and how they interface with all the different types of users that you have in your environment. This will start to give you the ability to think about what your ideal state is, what you would like to move away from, as well as just truly understand where your investments lie today. The next step that we see is called quick win. Now, the reason we call it that is because the first time that we take stock and see everything that's going on, we want to see what's that one step that we can take to truly see a large difference with maybe a smaller step. We've all seen and heard of single sign-on and MFA, and hopefully a lot of you have this applied to a lot of your environment. But when we start to look at a diverse environment in hybrid IT, where you have tools on-premise, you have tools in cloud, you have different types of devices, we really start to think about, how do we put that together? And in terms of how our customers have done this with Okta, it's truly taking account of, what are the types of applications and tools that you're trying to create access to? What kind of security do I want to layer on to them? And how can I apply to do so? One thing that's truly worked for a lot of my customers is just balancing the difference between SaaS applications, on-prem applications, and thinking about if they can create similar experiences for the two using Okta. There's different tool sets and features that we can offer you to help you do that. But the first step that we see is access. So gaining access in the same simple form, no matter what type of application you're accessing, and abstracting that away for the end user. The second step that we see in terms of security is, security means so many different things and is unique to both your environment as well as the type of device and type of situation and login event you're in. But one of the things that has been proven to always help us with the next step to security is MFA. So where we see customers go with this is, first, apply access to their tools, be it on-prem or cloud, and start to think about how they can possibly connect to Okta. And then once it's connected, as you know, it's very seamless to start to add on policies on top of that. Sometimes it takes a little longer to start to account for what kind of policies are going to help, but MFA is tried and tested and one of the easiest ways to realize both usability and security, since you can start to customize what kinds of MFA you want to offer your different types of users in your environment. If you look at the benefit of this, you really start to look at moving away from having a very diverse identity landscape and users wondering every day how they log into different tools, making sure that end user experience is seamless. The second thing that we see here that's very common is just consolidating user sources. So for example, something that we work on a lot is domain consolidation. So if you have a lot of different sources of truth or sources of where your users are, something that's great is you don't have to go to this ideal destination of putting everything together, but is there a way that you could streamline them into Okta and connect it to your other tools where the end user needs to be able to get access to what they need without having to worry about any of those details? and also take away some of the load that admins have on building custom scripts and really making sure, is this user supposed to be here or not? And being able to see that in Okta's universal directory in one place and start to build their security story. The next thing that we see is streamlining account management. Now, this means different things based on what you're trying to do. So one thing that we talk about a lot is when we start to think about where your users lie, we also start to think about what kind of user is this? Is this an employee? Is this a partner? Is this a contractor who is only temporarily in my tools? And do they maybe need to be in a different place? Am I also working with customers and contractors? And the reason this is important is we want you to be enabled to have that experience where you are tailoring security as well as usability based on who the user is themselves. Now, if we also think about the traditional world where anybody who needed identity, anybody who needed access, we had to put everything in Active Directory. With the options that we have today in technology, you're able to really take stock of what truly should be in Active Directory. Is it my employees? Is it something else? Are my other kinds of users maybe contractors? Could they be in some other source? A very common setup that we see here is employees being treated one way and then contractors and partners being put in a direct directory in Okta's universal directory. In the case of NRC, like John mentioned, they did migrate all their users over to universal directory since it gives you the extensibility to truly see all your users in the same place in cloud and really delegate that management. But again, you can have your unique setup and what's right for you. One thing that's very common here that we see is the HR systems. We see a lot of different HR systems being used here, not just for one reason, but for many. A lot of your teams, be it in connected manner or in disconnected manner, use HR systems today to truly understand the source of truth of who a user is as an employee in your environment. If you think about it, the HR system should most definitely be created in link with your access system because that is your genuine source of truth of who the user is. We offer several different features here in terms of HR as a master. And the reason this is important is you can start to create your own custom triggers for how a user is created in your environment. And when I say created, if we really break it down to what those workflows are, let's take the simple example of a user joining a company. I've heard everything from having to build custom scripts, having to put in manual tickets, all the way to it just happens automatically. We want to help you get there based on what you need. The reason this is important is because a lot of the times it's easy to forget what the different pieces are since it's happening in so many different environments. Does somebody need something from their team? Does somebody need something from IT, which is specific to the device? With the integrations that you can see now, you'll be able to do all of this out of the box. Starting with, I've seen HR as a master create a lot of success since you can streamline the onboarding and offboarding of a user, trickle that into Okta. Within Okta, using groups and other workflows, you'll be able to say what they have access to and layer on security accordingly. What this helps you with is truly starting to understand the onboarding and offboarding a user and automating everything you have related to that account, making it seamless for both the admin and the end user, and creating unique experiences for different types of users. When we start to think about this also from a context perspective, you'll notice that this really starts to help you think about what are those pieces of information that you would like to pay attention to based on the stage of a user and how it interacts with your different tools. The next thing we hear about a lot is devices, right? So which one of us here hasn't thought about how we interact with the different tools, be it at our own job, be it at in our personal life? We think a lot about how devices interact with our environments. This is really important because when I talk to a lot of our customers, one of the key things they ask us is, how do I ensure that this is not just the right user, but also the right device that's accessing my tools? Now, a key piece of that is how are these devices being managed today? Now, in our traditional world, be it in terms of your servers, be it in terms of your devices. Everything connects to Active Directory and is managed by tools like SCCM, GPOs, and they've done a great job at helping us in that world where we were able to gate access on network. But I know a lot of you have heard of the words zero trust or the new world we live in, where the only perimeter that we can truly gate is people. And what that ends up meaning is that we now own the responsibility of enabling the ability to use the tools no matter where you are for users to get their job done or have access to the things they need. Now, this brings up an interesting question in the realm of security, which is, how do I make sure that they do get the access they need, but without compromising the security we need from an admin perspective? With this leads to a lot of conversations around contextual access. How do I make sure that my device is being managed the right way, and can we incorporate that into our access decision? This is definitely an area where we have a lot of conversations around what that means today. I truly encourage you to start to think about what new features you can enable for your users to be more productive based on the tools you use in this space. No longer do we have to domain join our devices to receive our access. We can start to think about different ways to do that. Customers are starting to think about BYOD machines. How can we enable that? With Okta, one of the things that we've really been focusing on, and I'm sure you've heard of in the other sessions as well, is truly helping you bring in your device context into Okta, be it in terms of, have I seen this device before? Is this device registered? Is this device enrolled in a tool of your choice? And bringing that best of breed understanding of security to really define what that security experience is. One thing that we see very often here is the plan to move away from completely domain joined machines to start to think about UEM managed desktops or laptops. And that also enables a hybrid environment where your users are enabled to use any device that they would like without compromising the security that they need. We've announced a lot of new features recently in this space, and we'll hope that that makes a difference in your environment as well. And we really encourage you to come back to us with that feedback as well. Last but not the least, we talk about the word disruptive. The reason this really matters to us and the reason we talk about this is everyone's environment is very unique. And when we start to think about the changes that you can make, it's amazing how one project or one change in terms of access or usability or how you define the end user experience or changing your tools can make a transformational experience for your end users and your security in your environment. So key thing that we see here is the word agile and best of breed. The reason this is important is, as we talk about at Okta Allow, we truly want to enable you to be able to use any tool that you would like. One thing that I come back to here is, I know we talk a lot about rethink AD, or we talk about how do we move away from things. But one thing that I've seen have a lot of success with a lot of customers is that it's not binary. We start to think about how do we coexist in this hybrid IT world, but create the experiences for an end user which actually push you in one way or the other. The reason this is important is we realize that there's going to be tools that work in different manners, but how can they work together and how can they exist in the same way without compromising on that experience? So if you have tools that are on-premise, how can you connect them in a way that the user doesn't even realize they're on-premise, but you have gated that with the security you need? How can you ensure that a user gets what they need without having to enter passwords all the time, without having to get access manually every single time? These are all little things that add up, but the key here is to really make sure that we're meeting in the middle of what your hybrid environment needs, and that's what our hybrid IT experiences are all about. With that, I hope that was a quick way to think about all the different steps that would maybe start to think about the next step of what you can do to truly look at your environment and make yourself more successful in the hybrid IT usability and security space. We talked about a few different things here, both from the value perspective as well as things you can do to take stock of your environment and take that next step. One thing that I would really encourage you to do is to come talk to us. Talk to us about what your goals are and not just about the point solution or what you need from us. We're here to support you as you take this journey, and we want to hear from you as to how we can help you further make those changes. Consolidating your identity on a single platform will really, really stretch everything you need further, including the value. John put some numbers on some things that I don't think we've ever had a chance to really look at and take stock at to see what that value means. And I'm sure there'll be teams at your company that would really be impressed with that kind of way of looking at things as well. To consolidate, definitely don't go all at once. The reason we encourage that maturity curve is to really pace out how we can think about different things. And one thing to remember is that each step has its own value. It brings so much change and so much of a difference in your environment that even as you phase out different things, you can start to see those changes in your environment make an impact. To learn more, please make sure that you can attend some of our other sessions that talk about retiring some of our legacy tools, as well as some of our latest and greatest features. If you have any other questions, please feel free to chat us in, as well as attend the virtual hubs. We've tried our best to make this an experience that you can really take away from virtually. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out, and we really hope this was something that you could take something away from. With that, I'm going to open it up for further questions. We really appreciate your time in joining us today. Thank you.